makes the most, that's the most important to me in trying to figure these things out. It's that second bounce rule. The idea that once you have two bounces, or one bounce, and back up to the same height, you can predict exactly how high every other bounce is going to be. That's the one that is the most important when you're dealing with multiple balls. And the reason I say that is because let's do our test here. Okay, let's say this is a tennis ball. Okay, here's our tennis ball. It's doing its thing, and it comes back up to this height. So remembering our rule, or yeah, it's a rule. I guess you could call it a rule. It's also a tool. We'll call it a tool. What this does for us is we can see that it loses 30% of its energy every time, right? And that means that I can immediately predict that the next bounce is only going to jump that high, and then the bounce after that is going to jump this high, and so on and so forth, right? That's going to be the tennis ball's bouncing pattern, right? Now, let's change colors here. Now, if we have a bowling ball falling, I have Photoshop. Let's use layers. That makes the most sense. A bowling ball falling from exactly the same height, maybe hits at exactly the same time, but it only goes this high. Now, how high, if we measure bottom to bottom, how much of a drop is that? Well, yeah, kind of eyeballing it, I'd say maybe, I don't know, 80%. Let's see if I can divide this into fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good guess. So I have the bowling ball losing 80% of its energy each time it bounces. And that means that in the next bounce, again, if I eyeball it, it might be about here. Like that's the high point in the bounce. And then the next bounce, it's going to be so close to the ground, you know, we might get a little bit above the ground, but then it'll just seem like a vibration, and the next bounce will just be on the ground, you know. So comparing these, it's not so much how much hang time do they have, it's how long are they going to be in the air and how high are they going to bounce, and how long are they going to continue bouncing for. That's what's going to tell us this is one type of ball and this is another type of ball. Now again, what people tend to think, they tend to say, well, it's a beach ball, so it's light, there's air in it, it's going to stay in the air. No, it's not going to stay in the air. The only thing that's going to keep it in the air is if it has a very elastic collision with the ground, which means that it's going to save up a whole lot of its energy and it's going to bounce back into the air again. Okay? If it doesn't have an elastic collision, it can bounce almost exactly the same as a bowling ball bounces. And you may have seen this in the, I'm not sure what the video reference is that was included with this assignment, but I know that there are videos out there of basically partially deflated beach balls bouncing, and they behave very similar to a bowling ball in the sense that they hit the ground and they stay very close to the ground. Okay, so you know, when you watch that, some people are taken aback and say, oh well, I thought it would bounce high, I thought it would float in the air. It doesn't, and the reason is because think about what a beach ball is. A beach ball is basically an outer shell, and this outer shell has mass. Okay, if you take this outer, and inside there's air, right? But that outer shell has mass, and if you crumple it all up, you might arrive at something about this big, you know. But think about that. So now you have something that's the same weight as maybe a tennis ball, but you know, and how does a tennis ball behave? You know what I mean? It's not going to float in the air any longer than anything else. So this idea of really understanding how does this ball bounce? How does it behave? That's going to help you differentiate the balls from each other. Okay? And what this really shows is, again, the idea of an elastic collision. Now, all that means, elastic collisions simply refer to the fact that when an object hits the ground or another object, the energy that it had when it goes into the collision, some of it is retained. Okay, it keeps some of that energy. Now, it loses some of it, but it also keeps some of it. So, a perfectly elastic collision, or a 100% elastic collision, would mean that the amount of energy that goes into the collision is exactly the same as what comes out. So if the ball hit the ground and bounced back up, it would bounce right back up to exactly the same height that it started from. Okay. Now, we all know in our experience that that doesn't happen. There's always some kind of loss of energy that occurs. But do you remember that one graphic? There was a graphic of a steel ball bearing on a steel plate, and they said that retained 98% of its energy. So for that, you could watch it for a very long time. It would seem to bounce really, really long, almost perfect. But that's because it only loses 2% of its energy each and every time. Does that make sense to everybody?
It makes sense to me, but the steel ball is like non-elastic, at least for our eyes. I don't know.
For your eyes? What do you mean?
Yeah, when you are just observing, you can't see like any kind of deformation on a steel ball.
Right. Now, elasticity and deformation are two different things. Okay. Elasticity doesn't mean that you see something like squashing or stretching. Okay, that's not what it's referring to. It's referring to the retention of energy. Okay, this is like a physics term. Okay. So actually, when you do see a deformation, that's actually losing energy. Okay, because energy is going into changing the shape of the object. So if your object deforms a lot, you're going to lose whatever energy you possibly had, or some of it. Anyway, does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, are there any questions on that topic, or we'll move on to the next one? I think somebody else asked the same question in a different way. So, what is the main difference in the movement for the balls that will help us distinguish their types? Amount of squash stretch, amount of time spent on the ground, value of stored energy after each bounce, decrease rate of frames for each bounce. Okay, so this is really good. This is a good question. And it's pretty much what we talked about, but you've added in a few other questions that tie into this. So the main differences in the movement for the balls that will help you distinguish their types. Okay, mostly it's this idea of how much energy you're losing with each bounce. Okay, and this depends greatly on the materials, not only of the balls, but also of the surface that they're impacting. Okay, now just a little thought experiment here. Let's close these off here. Just a little thought experiment. Let's say you have a bowling ball. Here's our bowling ball. And it drops. And let's say it lands on a beautiful bowling alley. Okay, and then you take the same bowling ball and it drops. And this time you've got, grass.
Yep. The notes are over the PSD.
Oh, sorry. How's that? Sorry, you can see my beautiful drawings now. So you've got wood, you've got grass, and let's just do one more. And you've got your bowling ball, and this time you've got This is concrete. These are little specks of rock. There you go. Okay, so what's the behavior on each of these? If you had to just describe to me the behavior, all these objects are falling from the same height. So somebody take a stab at what's going to happen.
The bounce back will be different.
In what way for each of these?
For the grass, it will be the lowest, and for the concrete, the biggest, probably.
Cool. Yeah.
Because
Why?
because the grass absorbs more energy from the ball.
Mm-hmm.
It cushions the ball.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, these different surfaces each have a different amount of rigidity, I guess you could say. So yeah, if the bowling ball fell here, we would most likely probably not even see it bounce. I mean, it depends how high up it went, but it'd probably just create a little crater, right, in the ground. Whereas the cement, now I saw this really great video and I haven't been able to find it again. I kept looking for it, but I couldn't find it. It showed a bowling ball dropped from like a bridge, I think in Central Park, just a small bridge, but it was amazing. Like the bowling ball bounced easily 10 feet into the air, when it was dropped from that height. So the idea that a bowling ball, when it falls, only comes like this high up off the ground, that's not always the case. And this is what is really important for people to understand. It entirely depends on the situation. Okay, you can create a situation where a bowling ball will bounce very high in the air. It just depends on what the situation is. And then the wood floor, it will be somewhere in between these because it's a lot softer than concrete, so it's not going to reflect the energy back into the bowling ball quite as well as the concrete does. Okay, but it will still bounce, maybe a little bit like that. Okay, so that's one thing, the amount of squash and stretch, the amount of time spent on the ground. So the amount of time spent on the ground, now I don't know who wrote this, I forget, but somebody answer this one. Does the amount of time spent on the ground change with the object?
No. It would keep in touch with the ground. I'm sorry. The amount of time would be greater if the object is more flexible, I think.
Okay. Anybody else?